This morning, we are talking about black economic empowerment and affirmative action. The question that we're asking our panelists this morning is, have these policies been successful in dismantling the economic legacy of apartheid? Have they de-racialized our economy? Or do the policies represent high ideals that failed in practice?
I think that the gap between rich and the poor, not only in this country, but it is worse in this country. It is widening. And therefore, anybody in our view who can think of reversing these gains, he would actually be taking us back to the olden days. And we think that there is a need to actually take these particular measures forward.
I must announce that Mr. Affirmative Action, or AA, actually has died a tragic death. It's a very sorry event, and he was terminally ill, but he could not survive the recent economic crisis and the skills shortage. So the fact of the matter is, unfortunately, affirmative action had died in South Africa. That's a bit on a humoristic note, but the fact of the matter is it did not work. The design of affirmative action is simply wrong. It focused on the wrong end of the system. It focused on the output-based, namely racial numbering. It becomes system-driven. So the fact of the matter is that you say that yes, it's a specific system, it's a system of representativity, and it's driven by the system. And the problem with that is that you have then a sort of what one calling an external locus of control. The system must empower. And that is why this poor Mr. AA died this tragic death.
Well, let's start by understanding two things. One is apartheid was affirmative action for white Afrikaners, mainly men. And secondly, it was a crime against humanity. The crime was committed by the government, and people against whom crimes are committed ought to be compensated by the person who committed them, the government. The present government has inherited the ill-gotten gains of the apartheid regime crime against humanity, and it has not used them for BEE and affirmative action. It sits still holding all of the land, all of the parastatals, all of the institutions created by the apartheid regime for white Afrikaner affirmative action. And it should be doing a big giveaway. It should be giving these assets to black South Africans for free.
The Mbeki era was a serious, unprecedented growth phase era in this country. We've seen growth rates that we haven't seen before. South African companies made a loot. They made so much money that they had never made in apartheid times. But still, in spite of that accumulation of wealth, black people were not integrated into the economy. Again, the goodwill of this country was just dished out, was not utilized properly. That's the situation that we're having now. Now we are now going to the last resort of saying, now that you've left it to the capitalist system, now that you've left it to the markets seem incapable of making a real transformation in this country. So I really think that the situation that we're having here is that the gatekeepers that do not want to transform are actually taking this country back. It is really a shame that all the good spirit, all the good intentions that this government has, corporate South Africa, is just frustrating transformation.
I believe it was a huge success as a temporary measure. It was a huge success. If we look at the public service today, you will see that the public service today is actually more black than the total South African population. Whites, Indians and coloreds are underrepresented in the public service as it is at the moment. It has been hugely successful. If we look at ownership, Mr. Manju will always remind us about the fact that only 5% of the ownership of the JSE vests with black individuals. But he often forgets that a very huge share of the JSE is vested, the ownership is vested in the Public Investment Corporation, which is owned by government, which is managed by black South Africans. So we have moved forward at a tremendous pace, and the danger today is that we could stick to these measures and see them as a way to alleviate poverty, while they are not really alleviating poverty. We are just redistributing wealth, and the poverty problem remains with us. We need to address that problem. And if we address that, then affirmative action will happen automatically.
We want to create what is called a non-racial society, first and foremost. And I want to capture it in Lutulu's word in his letter to Atsoch in 1957. He says, "We do not desire to dominate. but to share as between brothers, basing our heritage on ability, not on color. That's where we're heading to. That's the society we want to create. But in order to get there, we've got to, unfortunately, I didn't know that I'm going to agree with you on this point. We have got to do what is called compensatory justice, an international recognized principle. Compensatory justice to those who were deprived and excluded in our society. It's in the interest of fairness and justice and equity. That's why we needed that affirmative action and broad basic economic empowerment.
In order for us to have a stable economy, you cannot leave out the majority of the people from economic participation. Excuse me. There's an adage that says, when the poor shall rise, they shall rise against all of us. And I think that's one thing that some of the colleagues here who are saying BEE or AA was a huge success must learn. That when we become complacent and think that we can continue the economic patterns of pre-1994, we're making a big mistake. How do you say that if 2% of the JSE is owned by blacks, that's a huge success over 15 years? Unless you are talking about a different country. How do you say that just because the PIC has some minuscule shares in the JSE, that's okay? Right? We are not saying that the other balance must also be owned by government. That is a government of all people. The government of South Africa is not the government of blacks. It's the government of all South Africans. So that those PIC shares are also owned by all other South Africans. It has nothing to do with necessarily black economic empowerment.